Shalom. We're up to Perek Chaf Aleph. Remember that Shaul right now has decided that he wants to kill David. Yonasan communicates that to David, and David now becomes a fugitive because his life is in danger. And they had a final rendezvous where they kissed each other, they cried, they pledged friendship and loyalty, and they prayed that may Hashem be with them and their children ad olam. So Perek Chaf Aleph begins, V'yakam v'yelach, David had to leave, V'yahainasan ba'ir, Yahainasan returned to the city, and David is now a fugitive, V'yavai David Naiva. David is all alone, and he comes to the city of Naiv. Naiv is a village near Yerushalayim, and at this time, after the destruction of the Mishkan of Shiloh, the Korbanos, Tzibor, like the Tamid and the Musaf, were brought in Naiv, a city that was called the Ir HaKahanim. And David came to Naiv, El Achimelech HaKayin. Achimelech was the Kayin Gadol. Vayecharad Achimelech Likras David. And Achimelech was very worried to see David. Why is David here? People don't know that Shaul wants to kill David. They know David as a general of the king. Vayomer lo, and Achimelech said to David, Madua talavadacha, why are you by yourself? Ish einitach. There's nobody with you. What's going on? Vayomer David li Achimelech HaKayin. And David said to Achimelech the Kayin, Hamelech tzivani davor. The king gave me a secret mission. Vayomer elai ish al yeda ma'uman es hadavar. No one can know what you're doing. What I'm telling you to do. And as a result, he said, all the people that go with me, I sent them to other places because I'm on a top secret mission. But viata ma yesh tachas yadcha chamisha lechem. So David is starving. This is a matzav of pikuach nefesh. There is no food. So he says to Achimelech the Kayin, what is in your possession? Do you have 5 loaves of bread to give me? Oh, hanimtza, whatever you have. I need lechem. I need something to eat. Vayan HaKayin es David. Vayimer. And the Kayin said to David, Ein lechem chayil el tachas yadi. I do not have lechem chayil. I do not have regular, non-holy bread. Kiyim lechem kaidesh. All I have is holy bread. Now Chazal say, lechem kaidesh means the lechem hapanim. There is a shulchan, and every Friday there were 12 chalais that were baked, and they were put on the shulchan on Shabbos, and they remained on the shulchan till next Shabbos, when the old lechem would be removed and the new lechem would be put on the shulchan, and the old lechem was still fresh and warm, and it would be eaten by the kohanim. But the kohanim could only eat it for one day. They would have to eat it on Shabbos, meaning lechem apanim does not have 2 days or whatever it would be. So the Chayre, he's saying, again, there's going to be some difficulties here, you'll see in a few moments, that all we have is lechem apanim. Now, lechem apanim can be eaten only by somebody that is tahor. So if a person is a Baal Keri, had a seminal emission, whether through intercourse or not, they cannot eat till they go to the mikveh and have Harav Shemesh. The sun sets. Or if they're a Tamei Meis, they're Tamei for 7 days. So Achimelech says, since I only have lechem kaidesh, yesh im nishmur hana'arim ach meisha. I can give you the lechem kaidesh only if the people, because he's assuming that he's going to share it with people, although David is by himself, they had to have not had intercourse with women, because if they've had intercourse with women, they're a Baal Keri. Now, l'chayra, this is hard to make sense of this. Because even if, what does David say? So David actually says that all of the people who would eat this bread have not been with women. Vayan David es hakayin, vayomer lai, ki em isha atzura lanu kitmol shulshom, b'tseisi, that since I've gone out on my mission, I and my people have not been with our wives, and therefore we are tahor. Vayiyu klei anorim kaidesh, and indeed the utensils, even the plates, are kaidesh, meaning they're tahor, so they're ra'oi to put kachim on them. V'hu derech chayil, even though we were eating chayil, but our kalim are tahor. V'yav ki hayayim yikdash b'keli, and therefore, even today, if our kalim becomes sanctified by putting holy bread on it, there will not be a problem. In other words, that simply means our kalim are tahor and will not be metameh the lechem. Now, l'chayra, there's a real problem here, because miman nafshach, even if there's no iser tuma, but lechem hapanim can only be eaten by kaihanim. A zor is not allowed to eat lechem hapanim. So even if David is tor, there's an iser of zor. Elamai, what are you going to say? That ein hachinami, a non-kain is not allowed to eat lechem hapanim. But this is a matzav of pikuach nefesh. And if it's a matzav of pikuach nefesh, you're allowed to be over. Well, the question is, then you could even eat it if you're tamei. So miman nafshach. If it's pikuach nefesh, even a tamei could eat. If it's not pikuach nefesh, then even a tor could not eat if he's not a kohen. Also, we have to assume that this event is taking place on Shabbos. Because if it's not Shabbos, you wouldn't be allowed to eat the lechem upon him anyway. And I think I would also add, if it wouldn't be Shabbos, they could make other bread. So essentially, our assumption would be that David is coming to Noiv on Shabbos. Achimelech says, the only bread we have is lechem upon him, because we can't bake other bread, because it's Shabbos. Now, if you have a matzav of pikuach nefesh, so miman nafshach, we have a choice. We can bake new bread, or we can give you lechem hapanim. So here already, I think the shikul is fairly clear, that it is better to be over on the isser of a zor eating lechem hapanim than it is to be mechalel Shabbos. So that part of the narrative, I think, makes sense. Achimelech says, we will give you the lechem hapanim, even though you're a zor, instead of being mechalel Shabbos and making lechem chol. The only question is, why is the question, are you tor? Because mimanavshach, let's say they would say, we're tamei. He would tell them, he wouldn't give them the lechem upon him. I mean, that's also pikuach nefesh. Unless you're going to tell me at that point, better to be mechalel Shabbos than violate the laws of Tumah. I'm not sure why that's so. If it's better to violate the Yisr of a Zor than be mechalel Shabbos, then why wouldn't it be better to violate the Yisr Tumah? So there's a lot of kashas here. But be it as it may, David assures Achimelech that he and his men have not been with a woman, therefore they are not balei keri. Vayitn lo hakayin kaidesh. So the kayin gave him lechem upon him. Ki lo hayolo sham lechem, ki im lechem upon him amusarim lifnei Hashem. That the only bread they had in the whole city was the lechem that was removed from the shulchan that was in front of Hashem. Lasum lechem chom, that would be replaced with warm bread. Biyom hilakcho, on the day that you took off the old bread. And Chazal understand what this means is that on the day you took off the old bread to eat it, it would be as warm and as fresh as the day it was put on. Again, I'm assuming this is Shabbos, because if it wasn't Shabbos, they could have made other bread. It's very hard to imagine there literally was no other flour in the city to be able to make bread. I mean, after all, lechem hapanim is only eaten on Shabbos, so what would they have on Sunday? There must have been. So memela, this must have been on Shabbos. Now, this little transaction where David is given the lechem hapanim to eat because of pikuach nefesh, V'sham ish mi'avdei Shaul b'yomahu ne'atzar lifnei Hashem. There was one person there of Shaul's servants who was segregating himself to daven and pray to Hashem. So it seems to be a righteous act, but his name was Dayeg Ha'adaimi. Dayeg from Edom. Now, Adaimi does not mean he was a descendant of Edom. As far as we know, Dayeg was Jewish. But Adaimi literally means he comes from Edomite territory, which is the south of Eretz Yisrael. And he is described as Abir Harayim, the mighty ones of the shepherds. Now again, literally this would mean he was the chief shepherd. But Chazal understand Rayah as a kinoi, a nickname, for a chacham who is great in Torah, kind of the shepherd of Am Yisrael. And he was the greatest. He was the Av Best, and he was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was a great, great Talmid Chacham. Although we will see that he became a Rasha. Asher l'Shaul. And we're going to see that Dayeg is eavesdropping. Vayomer David li'Achi Melech, and David said to Achi Melech, V'ein yesh v'dach yatra chanis o cherev. He then asks Achi Melech, is there any weapon here? Do you have a spear? Do you have a sword? Ki gam charbi gam kelai lo lakachti biyadi. I did not take any weapons. Ki haya dvar melech nachutz, because the king sent me on an emergency errand. Vayomer hakayin, and the kayin said, again, the fact that this is Shabbos is a little schwer, but I guess having a weapon is also nichlau in pikuach nefesh. Vayomer hakayin cherev Goliath haplishti asher hikisa be'emek ha'ela hinehi loita b'simla acharei ha'efai. Well, we do have a souvenir. We actually have the sword of Goliath that you killed in the valley of Elah. It is wrapped in a garment. It is behind the ephod. The ephod is the special apron that the Kohen Gadol wears. Apparently he was not wearing it right then. He was not doing Avodah then. But behind the ephod, the sword of Goliath is wrapped. If you want to take it, take it. We don't have a lot of weapons here. We're not an armory. This is the only weapon we have. David. And David said, Ein kamaya, there is no weapon as good as this. Tenena li, let me take it. Give it to me. Vayakam David, vayivrach b'yemahu b'nei Shaul. And David got up and he fled. And he even went to enemy territory. Vayavai el Achish melech Gas. He goes to the king of the Philistines, Achish. Now again, not that he introduces himself. In other words, he's hiding out in the Philistine territory because he figured perhaps it's easier to evade the Philistines than it is to evade Shaul's servants. But the servants of Achish become aware of David. Vayimru avdei Achish elav. Hello, David melech haaretz. This is David, who is really the king, the de facto king, although Shaul is technically the king. Hello, lazeh yanu b'machalot lemor hika Shaul ba'alafav v'David revaisav. He is the one in which everybody says Shaul smites thousands of Philistines and David smites 10,000s of Philistines. So David becomes aware that his whereabouts are now known to Achish. So now this is a very, very famous story. Vayasem David es advarim ha'ela b'vavai. David took this very seriously. Vayira ma'od b'nei Achish melech Gas. And now he's very, very frightened that Achish, the king of Gas, one of the Philistine cities, is going to kill him. So David pretends to be crazy, pretends to be insane, so they'll leave him alone. Vayishanu es tamai. He changes his seichel b'einayim. Vayishaylo b'yadim. He becomes foolish. Vayisav al dalzos hashar. He writes graffiti on doors. Vayired riray el zakanai. And saliva runs down his beard. He's crazy. Vayimer Achish al abadav. And Achish says to his servants, Hine tiru, don't you see ish mishtageya? The guy is nuts. Lama taviu aisei elai. What do you want me to do with him? Again, I've always had a little bit of a problem. I mean, kill him anyway. He's your enemy. But apparently Achish figures if he's crazy, he'll never get better. so he's never going to create some danger to me. Ish mishtageya lama tavio soila. He's crazy. Chasar mishugoyim ani. Am I lacking crazy people? I got plenty of crazy people around here. I don't need another nutcase. Ki hevesem esel hishtageya alai. Hazeh yavo al beisi. Is this the guy that you want to bring? So as a result, they just let David hang around, and we will see in the next parak where he went from here. Now, as you know, we actually have a whole kapitel Tehillim that we recite on Shabbos. Bishano estamo lifnei Avimelech vayigasheya ve'elach. There's a whole kapitel Tehillim that David wrote to thank Hashem for giving him this Yeshua when he was behaving crazy. The only question is that in Shmuel Aleph, the king is described as Ochish, and in Tehillim, he is described as Avimelech, but that's not a kasha, because it's very, very clear from the Chumash itself that Avimelech is like Paro. Just like Paro was the title of all Egyptian kings, it was not a proper name. So Avimelech is the name of the kings of the Philistines. So they had a personal name and a title. Ochish was his personal name. Avimelech was his title. And David HaMelech composed a kapitel Tehillim to commemorate the great Yeshua that he was Nitzel from Avimelech, who is here called Achish.